A very good afternoon to you all, and thank you very much for joining us here on the Citizens Chat Show. My name is Judith Atim, and we're streaming on YouTube at Civic Space TV. If you haven't already, please subscribe and also drop us a comment in the comment section. Thank you. Well, today we are asking whether Uganda should consider abolishing elections, looking at the case of the Kawempe by-election. And later in the show, we shall also be talking a little bit about the upcoming Women's Day 2025. And my guests are the usual, Dr. Robert Ojambo, head of the History Department at Kyambogo University. Good afternoon, Doctor. Good to have you on the show.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much.
I'm also pleased to have with me Dr. Sarah Bireete, Executive Director, Center for Constitutional Governance. Good afternoon, Dr. Sarah.
Good afternoon, Judith, panelists and the viewers. Glad to be back on the chat show.
Thank you. And we also have Mr. Joseph Ochieno, who is a political commentator and a UPC ideologue. Good afternoon, Joseph.
Good afternoon.
Thank you. And a little later, I'll introduce our other guest as soon as he walks in. But thank you very much. So we're asking to hold or not to hold elections in Uganda. That's the question we're grappling with on this edition of the chat show. But I must add, this is also not the very first time such a question is coming up. We've had this question asked time and again in previous election seasons. And now, just about a week or so ago, we had the Kampala Archbishop Paul Semogere making a very strong statement when he said that there would rather be no elections instead of the country having a flawed electoral process which is marred by violence and brutality. He was presiding over Mass in Luwero Town Council, that's at Our Lady of Fatima, Queen of Peace Cathedral, to mark the 28th anniversary of Kasana Luwero Diocese. Well, the Archbishop made this comment following the incidents of violence that marred the nomination of candidates for the Kawempe by-election, which was characterized by heavy deployment of security operatives from JAT. And this is something we already discussed last week. But having said that, we continue to witness cases of violence in the campaigns that are ongoing for the Kawempe MP race. And just to start with, I think I'll start with you today, Joseph. As a political commentator, as an analyst, does it still make sense to hold elections in this country?
As a political commentator and an analyst, I would go on and on and on and on and bore you. But as a politician and a political leader and a leader of UPC, I would say, actually, no. And the reason is, we could then as well ask ourselves that if we abolish elections, so what? What next? Do we go North Korea? But understandably, if you consider what's been going on in the last 1 week, and you see how Kawempe has been turned into a military garrison, as it were, and if you consider what happened 5 years ago at the last elections, possibly the most violent in our recent history. And then if you look back and you realize that I have left behind the jacket for my suit, in part because of the changes in climate, global warming, and we're not having these conversations. And then I'm asking, what are elections for? So in a way, your question is legitimate. But most importantly, if you're amongst those people, including your colleague, journalist colleague, who was battered the other day, and you talk about the people who've lost lives in the last 1 week. And 2 days ago, Wednesday, I met a retired professor, friend of mine, who was amongst those people who motivated me at Mwiri. He was a fantastic debater when I joined in Senior 1, and these people inspired me massively. And forgive me, but this guy talks about how his sister died in his arm just the other week. And because he's somebody who's peaked the top of his trade and profession, but he couldn't turn himself into a hospital and health facility. And as somebody who's headed big global health organizations around the world, and coming home and then suddenly realizing that some of them would be facilities that were required in the health facility where he was not going to details, were not there, then you see what exactly is going on. No, I think this country has been taken for a ride by NRA. This country has now been personalized into a tiny little property that belongs to Mr. Museveni, his family, and a tiny privileged lot around him. And Ugandans need to wake up. If you consider that I joined Uganda People's Congress sort of a year after Idi Amin and Sarah, I always say this, and including on this program, that I joined DPC in 1980. Judith, you were slightly much younger then. One of the reasons
If she was
one of the reasons why, Robert, to include you, because you're not far away from Wiri, around Kachira, or thereabouts. Young Ugandans in 1980 were actively woken up because we had had 9 years of Idi Amin, and we had had 2 interim administrations. And for those of us who are turned 18 or thereabouts, 17, 18, we're beginning to say, look, there is hope for a new beginning, that we're going to reclaim our country, take charge, and determine courses. For that, young people were extremely interested in politics, and so was I. And that is how we critiqued DP, we critiqued UPM, meaning Museveni's political organization at the time, critiqued UPC, and young people joined political parties in their own different spaces and forms for different reasons, thinking and believing that we wanted to determine a course. Fast forward, I'm going around a bit, fast forward to where we are at the moment. Before we came on air, you know, I'm delighted, and people need to know that civic space is driven by predominantly young people, and particularly predominantly young, mixed young boys and girls, and they're always massively impressed. And part of the question is whether or not they're actively politically engaged, and whether or not they're not letting their country go. And part of the question, those of us on the older side will say, what is it that they should do? Particularly when some of those of us on the older side seem to perhaps be betraying them. Should elections be abolished? No. I think we just need to cleanse this mess. Ugandans just need to wake up. Those who are 17 years of age, those who are 60, those who are 70, those who are 45, those who are parents of children who are going to nursery schools, and those who are struggling with children going to universities. We need to basically wake up and reclaim this country from NRA. The fact that people are being beaten, in my opinion, is another way for these guys to simply say that, look, you know, you either keep quiet or we shall beat you up. One of the earliest experiences I had 5 years ago when I started engaging in particular recruiting and training young people was that it was not uncommon for some of them to come and tell me that their parents were saying that, look, you're going to go with Ochieno, but you know, you might be beaten up. You're going to go there. You're going to politics. You're a young graduate. You're 25. You're a young lawyer, and you know, if you, talking to Ochieno means you're being denied your hope, and at the same time you're telling me that you don't have a job, or you went for an internship, and then some funny person, because they're related to Mr. Museveni, they've been preferred and favored for a particular position. No, you must take a position. So no, elections must not be banned. The burden for responsibility of political leaders like myself, civil society leaders like Sarah, academicians, like Dr. Ojambo, you guys in the media, we just need to do a lot more. We just need to make sure that leadership is provided so that an enabling environment is created so that we put this NRA branch on the hoof. What is required in Kawempe? I don't know, by the way, my colleagues will tell me. I think just like we tried with Kizza Besigye, I think these guys in hoods want to be tried. I think somebody needs to be knocking the doors on the police to put the demand on the police so that police takes responsibility. I've told other networks that we need to be banging the door of Saibon Biabakama and the Electoral Commission. I've also said that we need to be putting demands on the Ministry of Internal Affairs on what's going on, particularly if people in government and security services come in and say they don't know who these people are. Meaning we need to be able to come out and demonstrate more. And we need to do so in Kampala, we need to do it in Kawempe, we need to do it in Luwero, we need to do it in Nagonga, we need to do a lot more. How much of that can be done holistically and totally as a group, I don't want to know. But my view is that we need to be doing more so that we reclaim our spaces, so that when a by-election like Kawempe comes, the topic of discussion 1 week after the beginning of the election process, campaign process, is not about the violence or even asking whether or not it's a worthy thing, but to ask what is happening in Kawempe. It's about jobs and employment. It's about environment. It's about education. It's about health. It's about infrastructure for Kampala. Or is it about our territorial national security, or perhaps what's happening in Congo, including why are NRA boys, our boys and girls, what are they doing in Congo?
Thank you. Dr. Sarah.
Well, democracy thrives in a condition of 5 tenets or 5 principles. One of them is active citizenry. So we need to ask ourselves, do we have a critical mass of active citizens in Uganda that can protect democracy? My answer as an actor in the space is no. The critical mass of any aspect is 3% of the aspect that you're looking at. So critical mass of Uganda's 45 million people is 3% of that population that are actively saying no. That all that should be actively saying no, should be actively pushing back, should be actively protecting the constitution. This critical mass, if it existed in 2005, it would have stopped the lifting of term limits. That's one act that passed us all. Some of us opposed it in our small ways as youth actors, but that's one act that we should have stopped in order to prevent the things that we are experiencing today. And we failed because of absence of that critical mass. The second element is rule of law. Still as an actor in that space, I would say that we have rule by law and we don't have rule of law. So the second tenet also fails. The third tenet is independent institutions. We are under total state capture. For example, the case of Kawempe. Who are the institutions in charge of Kawempe? Number one is Electoral Commission. When you go under the functions of Electoral Commission, I will just read the first two. The first two, let me just pick them up here in the Constitution. Article 61, Clause 1 of the Constitution. The Electoral Commission shall have the following functions. A, to ensure that regular, free, and fair elections are held. B, to organize, conduct, supervise elections and referenda in accordance with the Constitution. I just want to read the first two. The rest, in my view, are technical. Organize ballot papers, do register. And the Electoral Commission find comfort in ignoring 1 and 2 and concentrating on the rest. And when you ask them why do we have Kawempe as looking like Haiti or Somalia or Gaza, they will tell you we are not in charge of security. But what does the Constitution say? Ensure that free and fair elections are held. So the Electoral Commission is called flat, offside. The second institution that is supposed to help the Electoral Commission in matters elections is police. The police is running after Judith, as Judith is beating and killing people. So the two institutions are squarely accountable for the mess in Kawempe. And because we don't have the first tenet of active citizenry, these two institutions and their heads should have been caught by now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But because we don't have that active citizenry, then we are not pushing back on the failure. Because to commit a crime, it's either omission or commission. In this case, I think it's both. Omission and commission. especially on the part of police. These two institutions, their heads should have been caught by now for failure to discharge their constitutional duties. When you come to the other, functions of governance, the Minister of Justice. So I retweeted a tweet by the Minister of Justice, who is a political supervisor of the Electoral Commission. I'm happy Electoral Commission has met police. Really? It's like saying, unless you know that it's like, I don't know how to describe it. Because if I produce a baby as a mother, and then this being Women's Week, we should, as mothers, celebrate. And so if I produce a baby, the normal thing for a baby is to cry upon leaving the womb. But also after a few hours is to start breastfeeding. Because the food it has been consuming in the womb is no longer there. So if my baby has a problem and can't cry or breastfeed, which is normal, then that's when I would celebrate when my baby cries. That's when I would celebrate if my baby can suckle the breast. So that's where we find the Honourable Mao now, that he's celebrating what would have been the ordinary, the basic, he's celebrating it as a miracle because of the dysfunctionality of the state. When you come to tenant 4, the 3 are active citizenry, rule of law, independent institutions. Tenant 4 is credible, free and fair elections. I think those have been answered under 2 and 3. That's what makes a democracy. The 5th tenet is accountability and transparency, making sure that the duty bearers are accountable to the rights holders. So without the 5 tenets, you have no democracy to talk about. So it's up to us now to gauge, score ourselves. In my view, if I were an examiner, and it's good to have the examiner here with us, I would give Uganda 20%. That is now discontinue. or start afresh.
I was noting it was below 30%. Okay, fail. All right, that is specific. Okay.
Yeah, fail. Start afresh. So that is the mark I would give Uganda in terms of democracy, is start afresh, 20%. When you go to the 10 points program, restoring democracy was point number 1. So the whole 10 points program, I would say fail. Start afresh. So in this starting afresh, do we need to go to the bush? No.
No.
What we need is to ensure the 5 tenets exist. Empower citizens, hold their leaders accountable, to push back against all excesses, and defend the constitution. Empower institutions to function beyond the people, which we don't have. Ensure rule of law, equality before the law, the rules of natural justice. Everybody is only condemned after being heard, etc. Ensure that you have free and fair elections. The constitution is clear. Ensure that there is transparency and accountability. That's when we shall begin feeling democracy and the benefits of democracy. So the apathy you see today, the bishop saying, and I agree with him entirely, why should we hold elections to kill children and the citizens of this country? Is that what elections are about? To kill people? To deface the ladies that support Nup? Defaced? Full of bruises? The young man I saw, the feet turned?
The bonus.
The journalists who are fighting for their lives? Is that why we should hold elections? Why would Museveni want to rule Uganda on the blood? I know that he got power on the blood of Ugandans. But does that mean that he should continue ruling Uganda on the blood of citizens? No.
So, Dr. Ojambo, you've heard the submissions of your 2 colleagues, Dr. Sarah and Joseph here, on the question of whether or not elections are still relevant in our context.
Yeah, just basing on the lesson that was given by Sarah, because that is a democracy lesson. It was not just a talk. Those are the basics of democracy. May I just take you a little bit earlier on how elections began in Uganda. In Uganda here, Uganda as a country, the elections began with the formation of the Legislative Assembly. Now, this Legislative Assembly was a British system to try and create a semblance of Africans deciding their own things during the colonial time. Surprisingly, if you looked at that legico for the first 10 to 20 years, it was dominantly British and a few Indians. The Africans were not there. Until people like Kamia and Musazi came up. And for those who have time to go and read those things, those who don't disrespect history, the Kamias faced a lot of trouble. There are what you are seeing with these NRA things, these are just jokes. These men were deported, they were tried, but what again surprised me is that they were defended by the British lawyers. And that's why sometimes I tend to respect lawyers. They didn't mind. They defended them until a few people were appointed into the legico, not elected, appointed into the legico first. First of all, Buganda took a lion's share. He was appointing people there. Then that character of not wanting to vote started that time. Because I remember when they were making the first group of elected people to the assembly, especially when Uganda was preparing to get independence. Buganda wanted their representatives to be elected and proposed by the kingdom. But that was the thinking that came from the culture of Buganda, because in Buganda, kings and the chiefs and what have you are not elected. They are born. They are by birth. So that disease has continued in the country until that disorganization, which led to formation of KY, because KY was trying to introduce the Buganda agenda. For them, they wanted to have representatives who are appointed by the kingdom or the Buganda establishment. And that is the disagreement that he created between Musazi and later Chiwanuka. In fact, Chiwanuka was not believing so, because Chiwanuka was a Democrat. He said, no, if you want representatives, even if they are in Buganda, we are not going to elect people from elsewhere to represent Buganda. And that's how they formed the KY, a group of conservatives, united with UPC and pushed out to DP, creating that government where Obote was the prime minister and then Tessa the president. Now let me move a little bit fast. Of course, that was the last election until 1980 again. That's when we have another election from that early time, because the election had been promised. It couldn't happen because of the crisis in 1966. In 1980, there is a semblance of an election, but also marred with a lot of problems. I still maintain that there were problems. There were problems. First of all, people do not know how elections are supposed to run. And also they don't understand the British system, whereby the parliamentary system, it was confusing somehow. So you get into that, it ends up into the war of 1981 to 86. And then we go to another semblance of election was into the NRC. And as I've always told you, there are some positions in NRC that were not elected. You are not supposed to elect. They were sole candidates. For example, the chairman of the NRC, no election. That one, Uganda elected the members, but the chairman, nothing. Another council was the military council. Chairman, no elections. And so on and so forth. And you have seen in the history of the NRM, all positions are electable. All positions are electable, except one, the one of chairman. The one of chairman, there is always a person who will propose a sole candidate. And so there is intolerance of election in our country since the time of colonial times. And this intolerance crops one thing, organizing an election which you have to win. I have written about this, that somebody organizes an election with the purpose that I must win this election. And that creates the poor tenet that Sarah was talking about, fair and free election, because that election will no longer be free, because the election is only organized so that a certain party, a certain person, a certain group must win. Therefore, that is not an election, it is a selection. And therefore, Ugandans have been duped for a very long time that they are organizing elections, because they organize elections for other people. MPs can go and suffer on their own. LC5 can go and struggle. LC3 can go and struggle. LC1 can go and struggle. But there are certain positions that there are no elections. For example, the position of chairman NRM, if there is any data contrary to what I'm saying, somebody can bring it. And the vice president, the vice chairman, the national vice chairman. No election has ever taken place there. There is even no context. In fact, anybody who dares to mention that he wants to stand for these positions faces a lot of wrath. Ask Okoto Gong, one time declared, wanted to stand. How he ended up changing his mind, we don't know. There is a man, a former retired army major, who declared to stand. He found himself in jail, and later, I don't know what happened to him. These days, I don't hear about him, and so on and so forth. So, quick forward to Kawempe. Kawempe is we discussed this matter last time on this show, and said that by-elections have a character in this country. Because at first, and the person who brought problems to by-elections was Bobi Wine. You remember Bobi Wine comes, and he comes with his wave. And during that time when Bobi Wine comes with his wave, they won almost all the by-elections that came during that period. Asumani basalirwa in Bugiri municipality, this man of Aroa, forgotten, the one now in Kasiano Wadri, and many others, And therefore, the NRM had to change its tactic and not take for granted these by-elections. And I want to tell you, since 2021, NRM has lost only one by-election in Lango, this led of UPC. The rest of the by-elections, they have won them hook or crook. And my feeling is, for example, she talked about institutions. For me, I think the institution of the Electoral Commission has failed this country. It's a dead thing. If that good justice was a good man, he would resign and go back to the court, because the good thing, his job there as a justice was saved. So he would resign and go back and look at cases. Why? Electoral Commission is not only supposed to organize, but it's supposed to organize and monitor. They have left the monitoring to now it's supposed to be even the police with assistance of police, but they have now left it to all sorts of people. By the way, some of you think that it is only army, but even gangs now are the ones who monitor election. And without bias, in Kampala here, there is always groups of people. Now we have foot soldiers, because we need to look at the role they play. We have foot soldiers. During Sebagala's time, we used to have a group called the Solida, and many others. So I really feel that the Electoral Commission has failed us. The second group of people who have failed us are police officers. The police, the Uganda police. I've always argued that ever since they added on Uganda police a word force, we lost the police because it now became Uganda Police Force. And some of us used to argue, force for what? And many men have explained to me that sometimes in police you need some force. Now, because of this word force, it has been infiltrated by military people. And that's why now you cannot have a Uganda police without army men running certain things. And army men, their orientation of training is not to keep law and order. Their orientation of training is to fight. You bring an army man in the police, he's going to fight citizens. And it is clear they are fighting citizens. Because army men, the Uganda police, they first look at the law before they do everything. They are supposed to look at the law, and they are guided by the law. The army officers are guided by order. If he says shoot, you shoot. You don't ask according to which law. You just shoot. So that is another problem. The other people who have failed us, who have failed the country, are religious leaders. You know, in any country, religious leaders are supposed to be guides of morality. But this is a country where if you now want to see immorality, go to the church. Go to the church. You will see a lot of immorality in the church. The church, people are complaining about money being stolen. There is this church which is supposed to be constructed. Isn't it in Kawempe also? And the church is in Kawempe.
Which one?
And people have complained. I don't want to mention it here because it will create some problems. There is a church where people have been contributing money for now 5 years to construct a church. The church has never been there, and they are telling the people who have been contributing the church that the church will be there. Those who don't want to see that the church is there, go and hang. And nobody is bothered. Look at this basis of every bishop now who is installed gets a new car from government. From which budget? I don't know. Now, a bishop who has gotten a new car from not even from government, but from the president. So bishops are almost recruited to work for government. And therefore, they are quiet. They cannot talk about anything. Look at so many of these faiths. I don't want to mention some of them.
But we do have an archbishop who just talked about
I'm
this
telling
issue.
you, he's just talking once in a while. Why doesn't he join in demonstration? When you read the Bible, sometimes you have to demonstrate against sin. We want to see him walk on the street so that also policemen beat him, and we see whether
that is his contribution by being a voice of sobriety.
Let me tell you, in Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, or even Malawi, let me take you to Malawi. Malawi, it took the efforts of the church to fight the dictators who were there by demonstrating, talking, just saying at the pulpit that you see, this is not very good, and then even the people you are criticizing, you give them the Eucharist. You give them the Eucharist. I want a bishop to say, then onwards.
But doctor, so you didn't want him to give the Eucharist to people who have come because...
I don't give to them. That
is not what the canons are about.
Let me tell you, by the way, you may forget, I grew up in the church and at the altar.
You don't work on how you feel as a religious leader.
In the Catholic Church, for example, for you to get the Eucharist, you have to have confessed in the morning, and that's why they normally say it is only for those who have prepared themselves. But you can't see a commander who was beating up people. He's coming that he wants it, the Eucharist, and just
confession is a personal and private matter that we can't.
So for me, I think that the church has let us down. Finally, the other group that has let us down are now the electorates themselves. And the political parties. The political parties. I am shocked that these things are happening. Those days, at least you would see a press conference at a UPC thing, a press conference at DP, a press conference at Najanankumbi. They're just complaining. Oh, we are doing badly. But they are there. Do you know? The other day, I felt really very bad. That you see, some commentators of the NRM were very happy that if you are saying the thing is violent, how come we have 10 contestants? We have NRM, we have FDC, we have DP, we have NOP, we have PPPP, we have so many independent. We even have a former son of the president in
Son
this.
of a former president.
A son of a former president in this thing, but came independent. I would have looked at UPC, but he declared he was independent. So for me, I feel that, for example, why are people contesting in this thing? Why don't we see, for example, political parties come and say, we are not going to participate in this thing when they are killing our people? They are there. How do you dance with it? Once you join the dance of ducks, you have become a duck yourself. Then the voters, the civil societies, I want to sympathize with them a little bit. The civil societies, they have been a high hand on civil society, and they are only allowed to participate here. In fact, they have closed most of them. Many, their funding and what have you have been caveated. So them, I forgive them. But the citizenry is welcoming this. Why do you allow police officers to come and beat you? For me, I would say, if I was in Kawempe, I would remain in my home, only wait to give a protest vote. Judith, fighting dictatorship is so hard. That's why I normally tell my students when I'm teaching them that if apartheid was in Uganda, it was going to be here for 500 years. The South Africans just said, we cannot accept this. Do you know what they did? They knew they could not fight with the apartheid regime. They resorted to singing. South Africans can sing. I don't know whether you have attended any conference with South Africans. When they feel sorry, they sing. And that singing mobilized the people against the apartheid regime, and the apartheid regime had to become isolated. Because let me tell you, these bad guys have to be isolated. But these guys are not Sudanese, they are not Congolese, they are not Kenyans. These are our children. The people beating people in Jat are known by names. They come from our villages. Let's isolate them so that when I am a priest preaching, and the Ochieno comes, I'm just using the name Ochieno. In fact, let me use Ojambo. And Ojambo comes, and you discover that Ojambo is the one who has been beating people. I ask him, Ojambo, why are you beating people? Jesus did it. Jesus did it in his preachings. But here we have masqueraders. You have bishops who are almost businessmen. You have pastors who are businessmen. You have people want to benefit. The citizenry also want to benefit. They are saying if we complain, they will not give us PDM. So for me, I think as we blame these JAT officers, these JAT people, because now what are we going to do to them? They have guns.
I want you to wind up.
So for me, I really feel that the Kawempe situation is a very bad thing.
Okay.
It requires all of us to stand up and condemn it.
Thank you. So I'm coming to you, Honourable, but before I get to you, of course, we're still talking about the relevance of elections. Should we not have elections? But before I get there, there are two things that I'd like to read out. On Thursday, the Minister of State for Internal Affairs, General David Muhoozi, appeared before Parliament to present a statement about the situation in Kawempe, especially the violence that was registered, or that continues to be registered as the campaigns are underway. And he said the violence and brutality meted out on civilians by security forces are just skirmishes. Oh. And he also said that some of the civilians arrested during the violence at the campaign rally will be charged with illegal use of military gear. And he also vowed that the government would deliver clean, transparent, and safe elections in Kawempe. Okay? Of course, there was a lot of debate, a lot of contestations and concerns raised by members of parliament, especially those from the ruling party, about some clarity, because from the videos that you watch, a lot of the MPs are actually not happy with the situation in Kawempe, and they want government to do better. But also a few days ago, the Daily Monitor had on its front page a headline that says, "Who are they?" Okay, and that was and there was a picture of these masked JAT operatives and military men. And this is what the Monitor says: masking terror. It said the emergence of masked personnel of the Joint Anti-Terrorism Task Force who brutalized civilians on Monday has shone a light on the increasing culture of having security operatives masked up during operations. Who are they? What is their motivation and what do they fear? And the CDF took a screenshot of this and responded and said, who are they? With 2 question marks. They are Ugandan security and they are doing a great job. And again, I think a day or so after, he also, on his handle, made another comment about NUP's Lewis Rubongoya, and it was Andrew Nyankole, what the statement. I got a translation from someone, the CDF. Okay. And he was saying traitors like Rubongoya will be exiled from Uganda. That's the translation I actually got. I don't know, Dr. Sarah, if you saw that and you speak that language, if you could also give us a translation. Perhaps I didn't get that translation accurately. But I'm just giving this as background info because I still think it lends a lot, it adds a lot to the conversation we're having. If you're having high-ranking members of society holding sensitive positions, coming up with certain statements and narratives, as citizens, what do we read between the lines of these kinds of utterances? I'll now give you the platform, Honourable, to give us to make your contribution to this conversation.
Thank you, Judith, and thank you so much. I've listened to Dr. Ojambo, and he has really hammered certain points home. But allow me first set the record straight on the NRM elections, because I had Dr. Ojambo saying that all positions in NRM are electable except that of the chairperson and the vice chair. I want to say that all positions in the NRM structure are contestable and electable. And the position of the chairperson and that of the vice chairperson has attracted candidates before. That the other candidates withdrew, or for whatever reason they didn't proceed with their candidature, is something different. But for sure, even in our normal elections, you will always end up with there are instances where we have had a candidate coming unopposed. So it's not that once you have come unopposed, then you have not been elected. You have actually been elected. Now, back to the elections. You see, you can't close your eyes forever simply because you don't want to see bad things. Because even the good ones will pass and you won't see them. The contextualization of this debate, I think, is, for me, is unfair, in the sense that we seem to imagine that Uganda and NRM are one and the same, or Uganda and government are one and the same. They are not. Uganda is much bigger than government. Uganda is much bigger than NRM. Uganda is much bigger than NUP. Uganda is much bigger than all these political parties. And therefore, the framers of this constitution framed it for Uganda. They didn't frame it for a particular political organization. And in the wisdom of the framers of this constitution, they understood that elections is an essential ingredient in our political stability. So I want to take exception of the way we are litigating this whole conversation around elections, to imagine that because we have had instances where our elections have really, really been so bad that then elections are really bad for the country. They are not. Now, the aviation industry, the history of the aviation industry is very instructive in understanding where we are and where we are going. The aviation industry, particularly in the Oriental countries, was very much prone to fatal accidents. And there were attempts to understand what really happened. What is the problem? Why is it that the aviation industry in the West is thriving, and yet in the Oriental countries, we are having so many fatal accidents? until a study was taken and they understood that actually the Oriental culture was the one that predisposed the industry to fatalities because it's very hierarchical. So once you have a captain in the cockpit, the others, what do you call them, who are the co-pilots, you know, have very limited influence on the decisions of the captain. In fact, they were very much constrained to question the decisions of the pilot. So eventually, if the pilot has made a bad decision, chances are that, you know, the aircraft was going to have an accident, a crash. So that was the hierarchical culture in that in the Oriental, and soon they decided to adopt a completely different. They changed the culture in the management culture, and began to, you know, groom captains and pilots and so on and so forth, who then were able to share the cockpit and share information, and the industry grew. This is the same thing as a country that, you know, our country is work in progress, and elections is an essential part of building this country. And we should not by any way relent in our struggle to make sure that we make elections count in our democracy, because it is important for stabilizing our politics, for stabilizing our country. Elections, once construed as tools, you know, for political domination, then that's one of the problems. Once the election is used as a tool for political domination, because you want an outcome that favors you so that you have the numbers, and then you use the tyranny of numbers to dominate. Once you look at it that way, then elections are prone to abuse. We saw it even in the 1980s. During the elections of the 1980s, there was gerrymandering. There were creation of so many constituencies in areas where there was maybe a particular political party was very popular. They created many constituencies in those areas. The reason was they wanted to have as many members of parliament as possible, and then use the tyranny of numbers to make the decisions. But if we understand elections and therefore build institutions that guarantee a very high quality of elections, then elections become an indispensable part of nation building. And I think that is where we should be focusing. Now, what we are seeing here are exceptions to the general rule. By the way, nobody is useless. At worst, they can serve as a bad example. So what we are seeing should serve as a bad example, and we should take lessons from what we are seeing in some of these elections and say it should never happen this way, because that does not represent how elections should be conducted. What is happening in Kawempe is very regrettable. It does not matter how we package it. You have seen, as a political party, the NRM has come out very strongly to condemn the violence that has so far taken place in the Kawempe elections. And today in Parliament, you have heard voices of members of Parliament from the ruling party equally saying that this is not the quality of the elections we want to see. Because you see, in a few months to come, we are going into an elections. And you don't want a country to be submerged in this kind of violence. One, it causes our citizens not to trust the outcomes of these elections. And many of them will actually, they will voluntarily disenfranchise themselves because they would feel like, going to cast your vote does not actually matter. Or you would be presenting yourself and you become a victim of political violence. So it is not a good thing that is happening in Kawempe, and all of us as citizens must come out to say it can be done in a much better way. We can still hold a free and fair elections without violence. And that responsibility is for all of us citizens, but most importantly, for the institutions that have the monopoly of violence, the institutions of the state whose responsibility is to guarantee a peaceful environment so that citizens can be able to exercise their right to vote for the candidates of their choice. We should be facilitating. We should create an environment where people are able to, explain to the citizens what their programs are, what they intend to do as candidates, and the citizens make an informed choice. So this is really, for me, what an election is. And what is happening in Kawempe should not in any way make any one of us here think that elections actually serve no purpose. No, we have a country that is much bigger than a government, much bigger than a political party, much bigger than candidates.
Thank you. I would like to still come back to you on the question of culture, because you gave this example of the Oriental culture. I actually watched, I think, that report on fatal crashes. I think it was on Discovery something, and I also read it somewhere. But I also see a lot of similarities between African culture and Oriental culture, especially when it comes to questioning authority. When you are a child, you're not supposed to look at your elders in the face. You're not supposed to, the elders are always right. People older than you are always right. And do you think, to a degree or in a way, this kind of cultural upbringing that we have also follows us to our politics and our leadership, and perhaps we see these kinds of power dynamics and power plays even at, say, the ruling party, or let me not use the ruling, but let me say government. And could that in a way also be affecting how we legislate, how we conduct elections and so on? But you'll respond to that a little later, because I'm told we're almost out of time. But also to Dr. Sarah, you'll respond to this also after the break. You highlighted an important issue, of course, the lack of us having that critical mass of citizenry who can check the excesses of power, who can, exert themselves and so on. But we see citizens doing the same thing, the small number, doing as much as they can in Kawempe, and met with this kind of brutality from the state. And already we live in an environment that is a hostile environment, an environment of fear. So when we see the few who are exerting themselves, trying to exercise their civic rights, being brutalized, certainly it sends a message to the rest that, this is a no-go zone. But then the question is, how do we then help? Who is then responsible for instance, awakening the consciousness of citizens, especially when we find ourselves in these kinds of environments? We'll do that after the break.
Digital rights are those human rights and legal rights that allow individuals to access, use, create and publish digital media, or to access and use computers, other electronic devices and telecommunication networks. Digital rights include a right to freedom of expression, information and communication through technology, a right to privacy and data protection, a right to credit for personal works, a right to universal and equal digital access, a right to identity, a right to anonymity, a right to be forgotten, and a right for protection of minors, among others. The state's digital rights are frequently violated through various unfair actions, for example, blockage of websites and social networks, theft of credentials, unauthorized use of people's data for personal gain, privacy intrusion, online censorship, arrests and intimidation of online users, internet blockages, and the proliferation of laws and regulations that undermine the potential of technology to drive social, economic, and political development worldwide. It is hence every citizen's responsibility to respect rights of other digital users and to speak out or report to the responsible parties when one's rights are violated.
Welcome welcome back from the break, and we're glad that you're still with us here on the Citizens Chat Show. And we're continuing with our discussion today on whether or not Uganda should consider abolishing elections. And we're looking at Kawempe, the Kawempe by-election as a case. But of course, a little later on, we shall also focus a little bit on the Women's Day for 2025. But before I went to the break, I posed a question to you. The question of cultural differences or the dynamics, and whether or not this in a way also contributes to the kind of bad governance that we see around us.
Well, it's yes and no. You know, there is a management saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast. It just shows you how powerful culture is. And also it's difficult for us to think that African culture is homogeneous. There are nuances in our African cultures. Now, you see, our culture has something to do with respect and not necessarily fear. Because those are two different things, that you can be bold enough to speak out respectfully. And we have seen that in many instances where we have people who have spoken out respectfully but assertively. Perhaps what you are trying to suggest here is our political culture, which is a completely different thing from our African culture. But if it is African culture, the African culture is such that
Yeah, please
we respect elders, but we also have space to express ourselves as young people or wherever. So that hierarchical relationship does happen out of respect, but does not in any way stop a younger person from expressing their views. I think in Uganda, yeah, they say even a young child can beat the drum and the elders can
dance.
The reason they say that is because even a young child can have an opinion that you, the elders, should listen. I think that's where it is premised. So our African culture facilitates conversations.
But also elders can use their positions to abuse the respect that they are being accorded. Why do I ask this? If you have a grandfather and he's making a mistake or a blunder somewhere, how would you approach him?
Usually, you want it in the cultural context.
We can pick it from whatever context.
When you have a grandfather and he's making mistakes, usually you go through your uncles or whatever, and then they communicate.
Why wouldn't you, as a child, point it out to him?
You need platform, and he won't give you that platform.
So if
because
someone
it's
says,
going to be,
my
muzukulu,
this is what I think, chances are you would not actually approach him and confront him directly. So why I'm asking this is because I don't know how to put it, but I am of the assumption or opinion, and I could be wrong, that we have figures who are also, first of all, our leaders are take an example of our president, he's a very cultural person and very proud about that. And even when he talks to you as elected leaders, he does not look at you from that lens of these are probably my peers in the leadership space, regardless of differences in age. That narrative is always my grandchildren. So if that narrative is played out as my grandchildren and it's repeatedly, all citizens are addressed that way, then certainly, like you're saying, how do you then check an elder like that?
You see,
when he's praying?
I would rather deal with cultural patronage, okay, than political patronage, because political patronage has a different power dynamic to it. Okay. Cultural patronage also has a different power dynamic to it. So when a grandfather says, my muzukulu, like the way President Museveni says, my muzukulu, he's actually trying to bring a certain level of closeness, okay? He's trying to bring that. But if somebody is using political patronage, it's a completely different power relationship that he's trying to use. That is why it does not matter your age. It matters your position.
But
So
can't
if you
there
are,
be a
if you are in,
fusion
if you
of
are,
cultural patronage and political
it
patronage?
is possible. It is possible that you can have a fusion of cultures that that you can learn from. You know, cultures can influence each other. That, you know, you have my Lango culture, and I use it. You know, I leverage on that the positives of my Lango culture to influence how I approach politics. It is possible. But I can tell you that the way the state functions and the way political patronage functions is completely different. It is about institutions and positions. So it does not matter your age. You could be 20 years, you could be 30 years, but in a privileged, powerful position, you are going to use that position disproportionately. And the way you then exercise power, you know, and how you relate with other, you know, other individuals and institutions is completely different dynamic. So I don't want them to be, I don't want you to say this culture, and yes, they may influence each other, but they may be distinct the way we exercise them.
You've made me interested in pursuing this as a thesis, as an academic paper at some point in time. Joseph, over to you.
No, okay. I thought you
Joseph?
had asked me questions.
He wanted to
fine.
respond. I think you wanted to respond to something he said, and then we come to Sarah.
As a matter of interest, these cultural power dynamics can actually work both ways. In fact, communities and political leaders should make the best use of it. And political leaders in responsible democratic institutions, free institutions, and free spaces. And in part, that's actually what George is saying. He's actually saying something fairly heavy. But of course, he's limiting it in a very deliberate and quite understandable way. I can tell you that for millennia, these guys came and they had to use Uganda Kingdom and appreciate and understand its dynamics. The conquerors from Europe and the conquerors from Asia, and the Anglicans, the Catholics, and including the Muslim powers, and then come the dynamics of politics. Some of what I think my two colleagues will talk about, including when the electorate Uganda came in and started policy of democracy. Uganda Kingdom, actually, the KY thing, prior to KY, the argument was about indirect elections, and indirect elections was continuation of power and control by the kingdom. So this work, I have also suggested elsewhere that, particularly for Karamoja, for the record, Robert, and you may need to do this study, I was having very important conversations with Karamojong elders, political leaders the other day, that apparently the last UBC government had to put a check onto cattle rustling between 1983 and 85. And that this thing came back, and Robert, George will be interested in this, that once 1985 coup came in, Lango, Achole, and part of Teso, and then Karamoja, guns went in, and lawlessness came in, hence the revival of this. But the Obote government had understood the cultural dynamics and gatekeeper element. And what happened is that using the local chiefs to negotiate with these guys and to check. So you use the systems, you're known as part of the community, you handle the cards, you appreciate it in a particular way, and you checked. And rustling over a 2-year period had come to close to zero. And when you don't do it beyond culture, it's quite clearly a criminal. And so some of these things actually work, and indeed work. So that's understandable. But just very quickly, on the contextual element of the political history of our country and whether or not we should have elections, part of what Robert said is partly true. KY came in really into being in 1961, 62, really about 62, leading to elections, because prior to that wasn't there. But the political thinking of KY, people argue, has been associated with NUP, as it were. But of critical import was once the nation state came in, we as Ugandans needed to appreciate, to accept. Are we going through military dictatorship? Are we going through a monarchy? Are we going to go through pluralist democracy? And then, are we going to go through a parliamentary system or a Westminster system? And because we're a British establishment, that was we're claiming back ourselves. The point was that our constitution, 1962, 61, 62, was for a parliamentary system. We needed to go through electoral processes, and political parties needed to come. And I don't want to go to the details of what political parties are. So that happened. So once the 1962 general elections happened, it was all understood that, well, political parties form and their formation is not a subject for the moment. Their ideological leanings is not a subject for the moment. You form. You can market yourselves to the electorate, and the winning party forms the government. It was as basic as that. DP did their bit, UPC did their bit. KY emerged at that particular time. The dynamics neither here nor there. It's not necessarily true that they emerged, but it was a post-election. So they happen. Politics and elections. What's the idea? The idea that once you win elections, you'll have persuaded the population, and then you go and deliver. Now, whether or not you deliver on the basis of that should be ideally a matter for the electorate to then go ahead and determine over the next election cycle. Importantly, and I'm building a case, 1963, 1 year after independence, Ugandans at the time were very conscious that, look, we want to let go of the British so that we govern ourselves. That is how the idea of abolishing the governor-general position came in, which was basically British establishment. So basically, we continue to be part of the British establishment, although we're independent. We abolished that and then created the office of the president. That is how Sir Edward came in. Fast forward, 1967, the conflicts between monarchists, in Uganda and the rest of Uganda, 66, 67, regardless of the details, that's what has become the Republic of Uganda. Fast forward, come 1980 general elections. Again, regardless of the detail, and there's a case I'm trying to make, regardless of the details, elections take place, DP participates, UPC participates, CP participates, UPM does participate, there's an election outcome. Political parties, democracy, because the issue is, should we ban elections? Elections do take place. But there's something I want to see. As it happens, the only other surviving founder member of RONASA, apart from Mr. Museveni, is someone whom I happen to know, Sarah doesn't know. Yoga Vola is in the US. Yoga, together with Katagea, were Museveni's closest buddies at the time. Yoga fell out with them and left Katagea, a very sad man, together with Museveni. But you know what? Yoga argues, even 2 days ago, I think Wednesday, I saw some writing, where he's saying that, look, Museveni's idea of going to Luwero was not because of elections rigging or anything else, but choosing thing for his son. But it was the idea that he wanted to install a Cuban-style revolution in Uganda. Now, a Cuban-style revolution, it is basically monolithic, one party, and you don't believe in elections. So in 1980, we know that 1981, Museveni went to Luwero to the idea, that's Yoga's argument. I sort of have issues with it a bit, but that Museveni wanted to have a Cuban-style revolution in Uganda. So therefore, political parties pros would not be there. It's not surprising. At some stage, he became a very quick friend of Godfrey Benizer, who also did not believe in elections. But for the record, for your young viewers to contextualize Kawempe, Dr. Moses Apiliga, who was a member of the Consultative Council with the interim administration leading to elections, together with Paul Mwanga and I think 3 others with Museveni, as sent as part of a delegation to Tanzania. I think I've told this program, Tanzania, Zambia, Mozambique, and another country seeking support, practical support preparing for elections. That is after they got rid of Lule and Binaisa. And Dr. Piliga says that throughout those missions, Museveni was continuously arguing against elections. And all of them were saying, we're part of a delegation saying, look, we agreed in Moshi that after 18 months we shall have a general election and then return Uganda to normalcy, and then Tanzanian soldiers should return. Now here we are saying that we should extend no elections, no elections, no elections. My point is, to make it slightly shorter, the FRONASA UPM Museveni command, which controls Uganda today, is an organization under leadership that does not believe in progress elections. And for UPC, we've argued this again and again and again and again. And to take UPC away from it, as Ugandans, we need to realize that if you see what Museveni did in 1980, if you see what he did in Luwero, if you see what he did through the NRC systems, the RC systems, these guys do not believe in elections. In any case, anyway, they're compelled to go pro-rest. We open up. UPC and DP had to defeat him in court in order to lift the ban on political parties in 2005. And so here we are pluralist republic. But Uganda should know that we're a pluralist republic with a guy at State House who's a reluctant Democrat and someone who basically believes in violence as a means to continue state power. And I think maybe whatever happened in 2001, the shock about losing Uganda, and the shock about possibilities of losing other parts of Uganda, and so therefore Mr. Museveni losing control, is the reality of the brutality that we're seeing. So what am I saying? We are saying that let it not be that because we've seen whatever is happening in Kawempe, to say that we should review our position on democracy. No. The guy in charge is basically running his game, and Ugandans should be able to reclaim that space so that we go pluralist. But of course, the issue is he still the believer in this pluralist? Is he still a believer in that or not? Is a different thing. Part of my argument, and I'm talking about Ochieno, is that authoritatively I've argued that the same Museveni who went to Luwero is the same Museveni we have today. And part of my arguments with Yoga is also, I'm not even sure that Museveni was a believer in Cuban-style revolution, because Museveni is really not a revolutionary, because what Museveni does and what Museveni has done with Uganda, even in 1981 or 1980, England and UPM, is not a revolution. Museveni is someone who pushes his agenda, but wrapped up himself with his friends in Fronasa, wrapped up himself with his friends in UPM, wrapped up his friends, unfortunately, took some very difficult boys into Luwero. And the real Museveni is perfecting himself to Museveni, the man, his family, and everything else, but clothing himself.
Thank you.
We need to let away that Museveni and begin to have a national conversation where we to once again reclaim Uganda, at the time to reclaim a new Uganda, one in which we're able to have
Thank you very much. Dr. Sarah.
Yeah, maybe picking on from what Joseph is saying, I believe that Uganda is running a dual system. A dual political system of an attempt at multipartism for the others, and a monolithic system for the NRM fused with state agencies. Why do I say so? If you look at the conduct of the resistance movement for everybody before a return to political parties and the NRM today, nothing has changed except allowing people to organize in their own parties and do a few activities, of course, with brutality here and there. And that takes us to the question that was posed at the referendum at the return of parties. Do you want us to leave those who want to go and organize in their parties to go? It has been put, academically or otherwise, as to whether that question returned Uganda to multipartism or not.
I am actually confused.
You didn't know the question. I know Ugandans have forgotten.
I think you could just say that again. Are you?
So during
That's a very confusing question.
And that's the kind of democracy we have. So during a return, the referendum for return of parties, Electoral Commission designed a straightforward question. Do you want us to return to political parties or multi-party or retain movement system? They present the question and then NRM says, no, we don't want that question. So Kasuja, his legal team, and this is a story as told by one of the principal legal officers at the Electoral Commission at that time. So Kasuja asked his legal team, what does government want? I thought we were doing a referendum for a return of parties. So then Adolf Mwesige, as the Deputy Attorney General, so he tells the legal team, the president doesn't want us to seem that we are returning to parties openly. So they draft other 3 questions that seem to be straightforward, refuse it. Aziz Kasuja, who was then the chair, then he said, he told his legal team, let me leave you people alone. Let me go and talk to my old Muganda lawyer. He might help me understand what the state wants. So the Muganda lawyer said, look, these people don't want to return to parties. It's just a condition by donors. So find a way about it, a vague way about it. So then Adolf Mwesige drafts a question. do you want us to leave those who want to go and organize in their own parties to go? And that was the question put to vote. And what do we have today in practice? In fact, it is us versus those who want to go to their parties.
correct, yeah.
So the NRM remained with the system, even in name and color, yellow, NRM, they just added O at the beginning and dropped the O. Then retained the army, NRA, NRM, retained the state institutions, and the Ochienos and group went outside to go and do their own things. And this is the democracy we have today.
Answered?
Yes. So
It's shocking.
I know, I know, but I want to go a bit to what the Honourable Odongo said on Kawempe, whether Kawempe should serve as a bad example. May I think the whole NRM thing is serving as a bad example because they are doing things that are prohibited under democracy. And I want to invite Ugandans to run the bad example of NRM so that it's not repeated by anybody. Let's look at violence, this violence in elections. It is traced in the first RC system, RC elections. There was violence in Kampala because of the presence of multi-parties. The DP people, the UPC, any area where NRM's stronghold or whatever, strength is threatened. There was violence. The first elections, there was violence in Uganda because people were opposed to NRM. The second election, there was violence in Rukunjiri. When Paul Kawanga Semogere went to address a rally in Rukunjiri because there was a section of people together with the Musingu's Garuga opposed to Museveni who wanted to get 98% in the elections. With all the support, the first election in 1996 had violence. President Paul Kawanga stoned. You can Google the stories. When Museveni's support was not threatened in any way. From then 2001, of course, then the story got worse. When Besigye came up to contest within the NRM, killings, shootings, soldiers running military vehicles through rallies of Besigye, shooting at Mengo. The stories are untold, are endless. After that election, the likes of Manenero died in CMI custody, supporters of Besigye arrested. The story has never gone back. So all NRM elections have been violent in areas where they have less support, right from the beginning. So I think for me, then NRM should serve, throughout its 40 years so far, it should serve as an example of bad things that should never happen in a democracy. I know you asked me a question on citizens who try to show courage and stand out are brutalized. This sends a message of fear, of apathy. How do we then reawaken the consciousness of the citizenry? I want to refer Ugandans and those watching this show to the video of Selma, about Martin Luther King's struggle for civil liberties in the US and the rights of blacks in the US. Selma is cast, as Martin Luther King, together with Hosea Williams and Johnny Lewis, when they were in Atlanta and they are moving to cross this bridge, the Edmund Bridge. They walked, the people were in support of civil disobedience against the, advocating for the civil liberties of all citizens, especially the black people in the US. They walked together in a big group. As they march towards the bridge, they face a blockade of state troopers and local policemen that blocked the movement.
Bloody Sunday.
Yes. Yet they were supposed to cross over to the city. They kept moving towards the blockade. Troops watched people unbothered, not scared, advancing. In their big numbers, nobody scattered, nobody moved out. They came face to face, faced the troops. Of course, there was a standoff, but after the troops gave way, and the people won. John Lewis was the last to cross the bridge to make sure everybody else has crossed. So you had a group of 3 leaders, 2 leading from the front, 1 staying behind to make sure everybody crosses. Of course, there was a little turbulence, but they finally crossed. So that's the courage and tenacity that citizens must show, although not violent, because darkness cannot drive out darkness, again said by Martin Luther King. You cannot fight violence with violence. You cannot fight the darkness with darkness. Only light can drive away darkness. And this is what Ugandans must do.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll pose the same question to you, Dr. Ojambo. Our population, the bulk of it is young, and we know majority of those young people go through education institutions, including where you work. And traditionally, we also know education institutions, especially institutions of higher learning like universities, were predominantly spaces where we would have these kinds of civic awakenings taking place. But now with the situation as we see these spaces closing up significantly, earlier you said you were blaming the bishop for giving the Eucharist to the sinner.
The people who are not supposed to get it.
How you arrived at that conclusion, I don't know. But now, how are you in these spaces? And you also said, you know, beyond just talking at the pulpit, the Archbishop should actually go and, you know, lead a march or something like that. Where you sit, what is your role, or what roles are you playing to actually push back and ensure that these spaces actually come back and come alive, so that we actually have this critical mass of citizenry that Sarah talks about actually coming up and exercising their rights?
Yeah, you see, we are not an island. In educational institutions receive students from the countryside or from the whole country. And therefore, we are not an island. 2, we receive a very delicate population, people who have just come out of their adolescence, and therefore they have a lot of things around their head. 3, we run a curriculum that is supposed to be non-partisan, because if you just have to be careful with what you are giving to young people. And 3, indeed it should be a place for creating the future of the country. But that is if the objective of the state, the objective of government is for that purpose. We are in a country where we keep deceiving each other. There is a lot of deceit in our country. Leaders lie. I just told you, religious leaders lie. Security officers lie, including teachers lie. So our culture, he talked about culture. The culture of a people shapes how they behave with everything that they deal with. If you are in a group of people where lying is looked at as being clever and fantastic, because sometimes you really see people lying and people are laughing instead of shutting up that person and telling him, liar you. So when I was a student, in fact, sometimes I get shocked. What has happened? When I was a student, universities had been allowed to metamorphosize into an academic arena. These days, it is not the case. These days, academic institutions are run as if they are branches of government entity. I had never known that, for example, in an academic institution, a leader should associate with a certain political party or political parties. I thought this is a place where you need to paint a white slate and allow the young people choose where they want to go. If you went to our academic institutions, all of them now are garrisons of army. Every academic institution has a detach of soldiers, and you wonder who is planning to come and attack Makerere University or attack Kyambogo University. I thought they needed a police post to manage law and order. Soldiers patrol the place and tell you a lot of things. In fact, they bring, now there is a chief security officer. He's running the place as if he has come to run a detach. So all these things affect the young learners. And therefore, in a university environment, our vice chancellor used to tell us that when they are chasing you from Wandegea, because they do not want you to speak the truth, run into the gate. And once you enter, this is a home for the truth. But that truth must be sought and must be defended with evidence. You don't just speak that I heard it is the truth. And that's why students go to the library. So academic institutions indeed are supposed to be places to build a citizenry which is civic, literate, a citizenry that is non-partisan, a citizenry that is not parochial. You remember, in a university, we should not be electing a president in accordance to where he comes from. When I was a student, again, I can tell you that for us, we went to University Hall without a candidate. All of us, you would walk to the University Hall without a candidate. And your target would be this young man, this young woman who speaks, who can represent you in New York, who can represent you, because a guild president would be that person who is going to represent the citizenry. I can tell you, in my last years at the university, one of the candidates was Asumani Vasalirwa. He went for a campaign, and he had put on a different trouser, a different shirt, a different coat. He looked like a rainbow. He did not have anybody walking around him. But by the time he finished speaking, somebody had already said, I'm going to buy for him a suit, I'll buy for him shoes, and we are going to support him. And that's how he won an election. So that is the type. But these days, everything has been politicized in our country, that vice chancellors now belong to a certain political party. And they even put on their uniform of the political party. So what are you going to do when you are a dean? The vice chancellor has already declared that for me, I'm for this political party. And even he puts on that uniform. You ask him, Professor, why are you putting on this color? He says, we are for. Yeah, we are for. So how are you going to deal with such a person? The students, sometimes when we go there, we are not supposed, because you see, these are very critical people. You're not supposed to go there to give them your political ideology. You are supposed to give them the tenets as Sarah stated here, and they choose where they want to go. So sometimes I mock students and I tell them that I'm an RDC and we are doing a very good job in this country, and the whole class is against you. They're saying, you are not an RDC and you're not supposed to be RDC here. So my view is
just briefly, what do they think about RDCs?
Hey, an RDC is supposed to be a civil servant. By law, he's supposed to be a civil servant, non-partisan, appointed by qualification, and implementing government program. RDCs are, there is no RDC who is not NRM. They openly say it. For us, we're NRM, and we are pushing for NRM agenda. So people think, in fact, when you are a sycophant of an NRM, the other name is RDC. In fact, there is a certain vice chancellor of a certain university near in Kampala here. They call him RDC because of what RDCs do. RDCs have bastardized civil servant role to be.
It's his conduct, the way he's running the university.
Yes. So RDCs, by the way, if you didn't know, RDCs are civil servants. They are supposed to be non-partisan. They are supposed to, although they represent the president in the district, but they are not supposed to be showing that NUP is bad, UPC is good, this one is not good. They are supposed to be in charge of security. They are the chairpersons of security. And when you're a chairperson of security, you can't have lenses that these are good, these are bad. For example, recently when Pilau was demonstrating in Kampala, had the police gone to
Robert, we need to wind
so,
up and move into
so
the next
to answer your question
conversation.
in brief, academic institutions in Uganda pick the element of the state. Once the state is that high-handed state that is forcing only one ideology, the academic institutions also try to do so. For example, it will be very difficult in an academic institution in Uganda to invite the leader of opposition and you take the letter to the vice chancellor to sign. He will not sign. He will not sign. He says, I cannot invite a leader of opposition.
Thank you, Robert. So we are now shifting our focus to the International Women's Day, which is this Saturday. And this year the focus is to accelerate change. In the interest of time, I'm just going to throw one question at all of you. And I'll start with you, Dr. Sarah. You're the only female on the panel.
I am requesting that Dr. Sarah sums up because we give her that privilege.
Okay,
yes.
Okay. So from the men's perspective, and also from the different spheres that you come from, where are we stagnating? Where are we progressing? Where are we regressing? We're talking about accelerating change, and accelerating change cuts across different areas in terms of health, education, and so on and so forth. So which areas do you think, and let me start with George says I start with you. Just he just used his head.
I didn't know men are so much cowards like this. George.
Joseph, start.
He gave you
set the tone.
As a matter of official, as a matter of fact, I'm a feminist. But I'm not a feminist of the town style. I am completely a convictionist feminist, and this official, by the way. So I'm delighted that tomorrow will be International Women's Day. So I live it by practice. My party is the party of women, the party of the youth, the party of the workers, as we call it, and the party of the peasants. But in emphasis, where are we, as you're saying? No, I'm delighted that globally this is a matter that is now cool and changing. I'm delighted that it's a matter on the table. But that said, I'm also delighted that my party started in 1963, very deliberately as a program. You will be delighted to know that 1963, 1 year into independence, we had a very specific program. And when you get opportunity, Judith, and you must, Mary is now Ideologue focusing on a few other things. But you better meet and talk to her. She'll tell you how impressively, as First Lady at the time, amongst many other people, they focus on the emancipation of girl child. So part of the fast tracking of women into civil service and public spaces started at the time. Because colonialism, of course, one year we just go, I assumed in this government where the state was. So, fast tracking women in civil service. Number two, fast tracking and creating enabling environments for education for girl child as a matter of government policy, and so building girl child schools across the country. Impressively, 1 year within independence, I feel very, very, very happy that my party and government then was looking at it from that perspective. But number two, fast forward to where we are at the moment. Since we don't have time, what is it? I fundamentally, continually believe that when we're talking about the emancipation of women, it must not and cannot be a representation in the manner in which Mr. Museveni says that when I appoint a vice president from Busoga and a women smile and laugh. It must not be about numbers, what in cabinet or public places. It must be about the qualitative interest, relations, issues concerning and about women. So therefore, it must be about representation. It must be access. And so therefore, access to girl child education. I have actually argued substantially that a future UPC government, apart from creating a fund for a fast tracking of education in post-conflict in northern Uganda, but it would also include spaces and open scholarships for limited scholarships for girl children from northern and northern Uganda in the post-conflict Uganda. So generally, what do you do? Women want access to health. invest in health, holistic health. Women want access to education and quality education, the type that is provided for. Do it for them. Women, not among the urban women, include the district parliamentary seats women. Those are not the positions. The positions that women want are access to water and sanitation. Tuke, access and sanitation. In Nagongera, access to water and sanitation. In Kachira, killing off the slums down the street. Women want access to energy, and so therefore, I'm making sure that we speed up the process of rural electrification, because women in the predominant numbers are in rural spaces rather than in urban spaces. But generally, women, yes, of course, in town, women want jobs. Yesterday, Thursday, I was having a conversation with a woman lawyer in public space who tells me for how, Sarah, a particular woman, once you go to a commissioner level in a particular public institution, acting up and doing very well, once the substantive post came for her to apply, she was broken down, and a certain woman from a specific community, from a specific privileged circle, was plucked off from London and brought to take a particular position. Those things, this woman had struggled with children and families and everything else, thinking that she was rising through the spaces that must be. And the people who did that were not only an identity, but an identity including the fact that people were part and comfortable that she was a woman. That still happens in my republic. So no, I would say that what women want and what women need is improved access to education, improved access to health, improved access to infrastructure, improved access to transportation, and access to jobs. And jobs on fairness and equity. And by the way, one other thing that women want is not police brutality, but police that can protect them. Women and domestic violence continues, both in urban spaces and by the rescued, George, interestingly, our social class. I've rescued many, and I'm going to say this program deliberately. I've rescued a number of our colleagues who are women, senior people being brutalized in their families. In one particular case, many, you get a woman of our stature fearing to go because the DPC, there's no guarantee that she will get support that she can actually qualify. So domestic violence continues to be that, and it actually was in villages. Of course, cultural and rural area, there is also these known things where women in rural spaces struggle that you got married and you're property of the family because of this dowry thing. Last week I was in Toronto, just to conclude, it's important that a particular woman, once she lost her husband, this was actually quite strange. The family chased her away, and the reason was because there was a pending pensions money that was supposed to be coming, and her husband and the husband's brother were supposed to access, and the family did that. I was quite shocked that that was happening, and it's happening this day. Coincidentally, I had given them a lift because they asked for a lift, and I was wondering, someone who's just buried a husband, why are they asking for a lift to town? But apparently it turns out that they're being chased away. So there's so many of these things happening. To me, I think those should be the focus, and those of us in politics, George, those of us in politics, I think there's a conversation we should be having when it comes to questions of women representation. Finally, regardless, I am open about these affirmative action positions. Considering the size of our parliament, I'm not quite sure that's the best way to use our public resources, meaning distributing parliamentarians. I worked for quarters in position in UPC, in which I remained strictly women and young people at 62% with military voter support. 62% women and young people. I would rather the numbers continue. So let's have people in qualitative positions. Let's do like the British Labour Party, in which is the two positions, one of them must be women. What is it? We want to mainstream the position rather than district representation. And finally, when it comes to district representation, it should not be that a woman becomes a member of parliament for a district and then the turn it into a monarchy. District position is not state house.
Thank you. Well, George, it's now your time to weigh in on the question of women.
First of all, I want to congratulate Uganda on the Women's Day celebrations coming up this weekend, and I am a very, very passionate supporter of emancipation of women. I'm a member of EALA Women's Caucus, and I'm also a member of WOPA, which is Uganda Women's Parliamentary Association. I am part of this to validate, the rationale behind, you know, parliaments having caucuses that discuss matters that drive the agenda of women. And I've, on several occasions, particularly in EALA, stood up to challenge our women's caucus to say, you know, they need to elevate the conversation around this women's emancipation, lest it becomes just a slogan, so that we leverage on it for political purposes, so that we can be able to climb these political offices. But if indeed our intentions are right, then we have to find a more creative way of ensuring that women issues find traction in our policy, you know, in our political discourse, in our legislation. There has got to be a minimum threshold for any piece of legislation that reflects commitment to emancipation of women. And the fact that we have a whole women's emancipation is an indication that the women suffer disproportionately. You know, there are equity issues, there are human rights issues, there are issues around freedoms that women continue to grapple with in our communities. And this is not a Ugandan issue or an East African or Africa issue. This is really a global issue. That's why the women's movement is actually a global movement. Just that the context keeps changes from one place to another. In my community, I think I already are grappling with young mothers. There's so many young mothers, essentially because they've been denied the opportunity to go to school. I have a case actually that I am pursuing in my own home in the village, where one of my cousin sisters was living with my sister, and she had been given the opportunity to go back to school. And then she was persistently harassed, you know, by the mother, by the father, by the brothers, phone calls after phone calls, and then they duped my sister to believe there was an emergency at home, and then, you know, and that this lady needed to get back, and, you know, they created all manner of stories, and eventually she let go, and the girl went back. The next time we go to the village, she was pregnant, and she had been officially handed over to.
And how old was she at that time?
Well, she was just slightly above 18.
Yeah, but still a young girl with dreams and aspirations.
Yes, and there are many cases like that. So there is a disproportionate manner with which culturally we treat and manage our sisters, our mothers. So there is need to have that conversation. And that's why I think that the women's movement need to recalibrate their approach to how they deal with these issues. By the way, even where there are cultural practices that from the surface seem to be undermining women, there is need to really go deep down to understand these cultural and traditional practices and see then how you can approach and use the established cultural systems to deal with the cultural problem. Sometimes we want to speak from the radio stations and just condemn. So that approach is a little bit repulsive to particularly very conservative cultural, traditional communities, including where I come from. But there is need to just go and have a very well considered and very well informed conversation, and in that way you use the existing cultural resources to deal with a problem that is reinforced by traditional practices. So this is what I'm telling my leaders to say: you need to stop just talking about the thing on radio stations, on, you know, these platforms. You need to have an active citizen participation, but also come up with models that, you know, are best placed to articulate cultural values and yet at the same time liberating. So there's need to have that context-based approach in dealing with some of these context-based practices that undermine the development and growth of these of our sisters in the rural areas. So, if you ask me, I really think that there is need for that. But coming down to political participation, which is very, very important ingredient. I think the women are the weakness of their own movement. And this is because, you know, they have not been able to aggregate their voices and come out together as a very strong, loud, solid voice. I've seen this, you find that WOPA is working on its own, it comes up with its own approach. Then you have another women's movement coming out with, and so on. But you're not building national consensus on very key issues that would translate into changing the fortunes of the women. I want to see, for example, in a situation like what we're talking about here today, elections, electoral violence, and how it disproportionately affects the participation of women. I want to hear those voices coming out very, very strongly and pointedly, and the women coming out irrespective of their political persuasions, to say this affects the participation of women. I want to hear voices coming out on how, you know, policies, you know, in our different jurisdictions are being developed, and say, how are the women, you know, and be able to veto some of these policies, you know, as long as they do not represent the voice, they capture the voices, the reflexes of the ordinary woman in our communities, then you should have the veto, you know, around them. You can do that because the women have the numbers, you know. So I see that we seem to be, you know, we want to be politically correct at all times. And I think that I have said this before, no friction, no traction. Sometimes the fact that you have some level of friction attracts attention to detail. And then it is in that detail that much of the changes that we want to see in the women's movement happen.
Thank you. Dr. Ojambo.
Yeah, we need to congratulate the women in the world, more so the women in our villages and the women around us, for reaching this another celebration. Because I've always told people that women are normally the backbone of our society, be it cultural, be it economic, and be any other form. If you have a society of well-developed women, that society is very good. Even just an example of our villages, if you see a home where there are successful women, that home is successful because they normally have that, they have the chemistry of building families, they have the chemistry of propelling growth. I remember one time, I didn't know why my mother did this to me. They used to have an association called Muno Mukabi in their village, and she was the secretary, but she was not very good at writing. So she started sending me to represent her in that group of women. Women only, I was the only male thing there. So I started writing for them minutes, and I learned a lot of things. I think I did it for almost a year. And I started closely to study women, what they want, how they do their things, how they influence things. And that's what many of our leaders have failed to do. They want to advocate for women when they really don't know what the women want and how the women want their things to be done. There is a particular way that women want to do their things, which is opposite from men. Women, they want their things to be slow. They want their things to be
Slow but sure.
and accurate. They want a lot of accuracy. They want a lot of honesty. I did a study at the university. This is the second story. I did a study at the university to lend money. Many people thought I had started a lending thing, but I was doing a study. And my study showed that women are very honest. They come with honest problems. And if you follow up, you find that very few would lie to get money. The men would lie, really. You would follow up and you find the problem they have told you is not true. And they pay. Then they don't pay because they fear, because they are aware that once they get tainted, their family is tainted. The men most likely don't care so much. So I really feel that what my colleagues have said here, Uganda has reached somewhere. We must acknowledge. We are not where we used to be in 1970, in 1950, in the level of education. I can give you again my own example. My grandfather had 2 boys and 5 girls. And this man decided that all his children who are girls should not go to school. Unfortunately for him, they became the most important people. And I was wondering if these people would have gone to school. Because I remember when my grandfather died, he could not select a heir from his 2 sons. He selected one of his grandchildren and made one of the auntie, my auntie now, the sister, to be the caretaker. And this man and this woman just did fantastic things. I was imagining if this woman had gone to school and did PLE just. She did not even do PLE of the time. So we find so many young women and women now who have at least done O-level. They have a certificate, they are qualified. And Uganda is doing well. We need to acknowledge and thank government that they are, through the affirmative action, we have achieved in the region here, it is only Rwanda that is slightly ahead of us. In fact, Rwanda is ahead of us. But we are doing well, and we thank government in that endeavor. But as my colleagues have said, especially the Honourable there has said that is not enough. We should reduce this habit of tokenism. Giving a woman, I normally see even at the university, and you see this is a structure also in our culture, and the other all the body politic of the world. That when you are writing a proposal, you are only putting there a woman so that you can win, to balance the gender. No, we should not. Yes, we should not run things like that. We need to put there women looking at their contribution in that project, looking at what they are going to do so that they benefit the purpose of doing that research or the purpose of doing things. Secondly, we don't have a lot of time, so I am forced to summarize. I'm supervising 2 students who are looking at affirmative action in the war in Luwero. And we have unleashed a lot of evidence that at first the president was against it. He didn't want it because it was going, according to him, to distract the war. But later when he understood how those people later became very, very important in the fight, I think that's why he's very passionate. So we need to carry out studies and understand women, as the Honourable has argued, according to their culture, and we support them in that way. We need finally to break barriers. Women have a lot of barriers. I normally just see my colleagues at the place of work. They have a lot of barriers. For me, I come from home and I will go back to sleep. They have to look after the children, even when they are in the office. As I speak now, my secretary have allowed her to come with the baby in office. People say it is dangerous, but I find it is more useful than when this baby is at home. So in the whole country here, it is only in Parliament of Uganda where they have developed a baby nursery. Why doesn't it become a policy in Uganda that every workplace should have a baby nursery? to break that barrier of people suffering with their babies, especially in the private sector. In this other sector, at least they have a luxury of maternity leave for 60 days or 90. But in the private sector, things are hard. You give birth on Friday, and on Monday they want you in office. So if you don't want in Uganda here, we have carried out a study. So we need to break, yes. They don't respect the things of government. They tell you, if you don't want you to. They don't care. So when a woman wants the job, and therefore it is bad to the mother, but even worse to the baby. That baby, psychologically, that's why you have people now who are boxing people and taking away their phones. You may not know that it may be because of that lack of mother care in that initial stage. So for me, I think we need to break barriers. We need to break barriers in education. We need to break barriers in employment. We need to break barriers in politics. In politics is where women they are taken as second fiddle in everything that people are doing. And therefore, that's why you see, even when the numbers increase, the impact is not so much. We need to work on it and improve on it so that when women are built, a society, when you go to Europe, you'll find that in the train, in the bus trunk, and what have you, there is a special place for children, pregnant women, and old people. In Uganda here, where is it? We don't care. A woman is standing at the road, and the people are struggling with her. She's pregnant. I just normally imagine that we need to create a conducive environment in which people work in, not just deceiving them by saying, oh, women are now very many in place of responsibility. We need to really deal with the problems that affect them.
Thank you. And lastly,
if you really don't mind for 30 seconds for the three of us, a take-off home. Absolutely important point, George. This business of daycare facilities in major institutions, public spaces, private and others, I think some of the campaign is a take-off home for me. I'm going to use it for the campaign. And I think we should really pick it up and push to institutions, whether private or otherwise, to pass. Not all of them, but generally, these are absolutely commonsensical issues. I just want to say proudly that in the 90s, as part of the Labour Party, I pushed part of this campaign for free, compulsory nursery spaces for 3-year-olds in the UK. It's not now only a policy, together with the mother of the house in Britain, but it's something we can everybody wants to pick and run with. Some of these things can be done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dr.
On the lighter note, I saw our Honourable first looked at him. I think he thought he
There
was
is
going to talk about
UPC.
I saw that too. So you were wondering, 90s?
Then I said, okay.
But anyway, UPC did it well in
Let me start my submission, first of all, by congratulating the women. We are 51% of the population, meaning that if it was a democratic competition, we would be on top of the country. But we are not yet there. So I congratulate them on this day, and all the women should enjoy, not just the day, but we intend to enjoy the whole month, because it's Women's Month. The day is just the icing on the cake. I want to start, because I want to end with on the good note. So I want to start with George's conclusion on the failure of the women, or weakness of the women movement, failing to have a united, strong and loud voice on women issues. And I agree. But how has this come about? Given the global movement that led to the Beijing, platform, conference and platform of action, because we are now at Beijing +30. So what happened to that wave of the Beijing that led into our making of the Constitution, the chapters on gender equality in the Constitution, the wave of Dr. Kazube and others, and how do we find ourselves here that there is no strong voice of women in the women movement, yet we see top positions in cabinet occupied by women more than the days of the Kazigwes, the days of Desira Jama, the days of Miriam Matembe, Sekitoreko, you know, when environment would just catch fire. Honourable Cecilia Ogwa, you just needed a few Victoria Mwaka, you just needed a few of these women, and you'd be like, wow, the women are there. But these days, we have a vice president, we have a speaker, we have 44% in cabinet.
Prime Minister.
Women in the big ministries, like senior ministers. But the women are nowhere. We have, you know, it would be vibrant civil society, but you find that we are scattered. Why? We have weakness. Because the women empowerment is not just numbers. And I know Dr. Ojambo talked about tokenism. So we need to see what has happened to these numbers. How come they are not making sense and they are not loud, they are not being heard, yet they are there in more than any time. So that we have weakness in these leaders, personal and then the environment. Then we have divide and rule and hijack of the women movement by the strong men. We have the godfathers who control the women, who determine which woman can come up, which woman shouldn't come up. But also we have the challenge. Women were more united under the movement system or a no-party system. And when we came to multi-party dispensation, the women failed to transit political differences in a multi-party dispensation to create a united voice. So if you have a sister Winnie and the husband is incarcerated, you will not see the sister saying, this is our husband. Yet that was the spirit before. So if you say this is our husband, then you are opposition. So those of NRM are not going to say our husband is in trouble. So this is the putting political alliance in the women's sisterhood issues, and now it has become a limitation or a barrier in addition to the structural barriers that people have shared. But how are we faring generally? I've been looking for some quick statistics. So when it comes to ownership of land, we have 20%, less than 20% of women owning land. And I've already said that we have 51% of the population, but about 17% of women own land. So that's really an area where we are doing so badly. When it comes to the digital, digital migration or the digital revolution that we are in, our gender digital divide in Uganda stands at 43%. It's one of the highest. If you compare with Ghana, it's at 5%, and ours is 50. Yes, we are doing so badly. And this gender digital divide gets worse in rural areas. So how will the women catch up? That's really a hurdle. So when it comes to employment, you have 38% of women being employed in formal employment as compared to 49% men. So there's a 11% difference between men and women in terms of employment, and we are doing so badly. So you have this situation where women trail men in education, jobs, and asset ownership. When it comes to teenage pregnancies, the recent health perception index by Ministry of Health shows that we have 27% of teenage mothers in the country, meaning that these are cases of defilement. 27% defilement in Uganda of children having children. It's a crisis. How will this is a lost generation? You get pregnant, you are not 18, you've not finished school, you're not skilled, you're not educated. Completely lost off the radar. Very soon they will get lost off the statistics in the country. And this is per April 2024. That's something that we need to look at. And when you go deeper into the situation of sanitary pads, which is one of the reasons why children, I'll call them children because they are below 18, young girls engage in sex, sometimes just to access sanitary pads. And in the end, they get a blockade that which will not even allow them use the sanitary pad that they are looking for. So, yeah,
Funny but tragic, really. Yeah.
I know, and it's very unfortunate. So we have 5 million girls in Uganda that cannot access sanitary pads or proper facilities for menstrual hygiene. 5 million girls deprived of proper menstrual hygiene. This is a big crisis in the country. When you look at education, I said I would want to end on a positive note. In the last 3 years, we have had a bit of equality in education, with universities graduating the same number, sometimes slightly higher number of girls than boys. Last year at Makerere, the number of girls was more than boys, and we were happy saying finally the 1.5% point has created equality, at least at graduation level. So I said I would want to end with on a good note, and that's the good note that I want to end on equality in education. Otherwise, I congratulate the women all over the world, but I also want to invite everyone to make sure that we accelerate the action of gender empowerment and equality wherever we are.
Okay. Thank you very much. And we are pretty much at the end of this discussion today, but I'll just give you each a minute or 45 seconds to just give me your parting shots. Again here. Okay.
Yeah, I think as we started with the election, everybody needs to play their part. There are so many people sleeping on their job, more so the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission have no excuse to continue running violent elections. For women, we just need to up our game. Once our women are fine, the country will be fine.
Thank you.
Doctor? Maybe for me, again, let me also speak about the Electoral Commission. I don't like the approach of the Electoral Commission, assuming that their job is just technical. They must ensure that the elections they organize are in accordance with the Constitution and are free and fair. When security, like Judith, disrupts elections, Electoral Commission should even call off these elections and call back security to order. Aziz Kasuja did this at a time when there was violence in Rukunjiri. There was a by-election, there was violence, and the Electoral Commission wrote and said, recall the army or I cancel elections. And the violence ended. So Justice Byabakama should stop short-changing Ugandans. He must ensure, that is his job, that elections are free and fair. If security is overpowering him, let him cancel the elections.
Thank you, sir.
He cannot cancel the elections because he's a cadre EC chair, and is a cadre responding to and responsible to a chief executive officer who does not believe in elections, and whose son is at the moment seemingly fully in control of the command of the systems, considering the most recent tweets. What does it confirm? It confirms that Ugandans have been shortchanged, and Ugandans need to wake up. That if we're talking about democracy, we're not going to get it under NRA. We never got it under NRA. But I think it's still possible for us as a country to go beyond where we are at the moment and build for the future. But 30 seconds on these possibilities for women. That interestingly, I know some certain Ugandans don't like us to draw reference from elsewhere. The UK, as of now, women are more in employment than men. Unemployment rate for women is lower at 4.2%, and unemployment for men is 4.6%. So these parities can actually be arrived at on the basis of what Sarah said. I think we just need a cohesive policy. But what's the founding thing? The founding thing is education. And that's what it was started for. In 1963. I think going forward, people who are in positions, legislators like our friend here, we need to be pushing more for those so that our priorities move away from pumping security with money to beat up people in Kawempe, and providing education opportunities, particularly for women in rural spaces.
Thank you, Joseph. George?
We must continue to expand the frontiers of our struggle for free and fair elections as an essential ingredient of our political stability. It's in the best interest of our country. We don't have any other country. The day you will leave this country involuntarily, your status changes. You will no longer be called Mr. or Honourable, they will call you a refugee. And you'll be at the mercy of those who are receiving you. So we must all invest in peace and stability of our country, and it starts with a free and fair elections. Secondly, on the issue of women's emancipation, it starts with us, and with us, the enlightened ones, to understand that the way you treat your children, the way you treat your maid, you know, really speaks a lot about how you are able to influence our culture, our attitude towards women's emancipation. So don't think that this women's emancipation can only be spoken on such platforms. It has to be spoken by how you treat your children and how you treat those who you are working with, including your maids. I've seen how women who are speaking so loud about women's emancipation mistreat their own maids, mistreat those who are working around them, but they will go on this platform and speak about women's emancipation. You must practice what you preach.
Thank you. Thank you very much to you all for your insights on this discussion on whether or not Uganda should consider abolishing elections and your perspectives on the upcoming International Women's Day celebration. This is the Citizens Chat Show. My name is Judith Atim. Thank you very much for keeping it with us here till this very end. The Chat Show returns next week, same time. Until then, bye-bye.